Hey girls, so today we are beginning to take notes on your chapter one. Remember, I have a textbook in the back of the room for you. If you need to take screenshots of those pages, feel free. And if other girls in the classroom also need pictures of the pages, maybe go ahead and just airdrop to them those just to help out. So, girls, we're going to take a couple notes today, but then we're also going to start a small project that I want you to complete over psychologists that we're going to be looking at during the semester. You are going to be making, I laid it out as a Facebook page, a fake Facebook page, a farce book, but feel free to create them any type of page that you want. You can create an Instagram page, a dating app page, not for real, don't really put our psychologists on a dating app, a Pinterest board, however you want to display information about your psychologist, you can. I'm totally okay with that. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about what we watched Philip Zimbardo speak about last class, the three different ways that we look at psych patients. So just to give you a quick definition of what psychology is, the actual definition is just the study of behaviors and mental processes. Throughout time, girls, people have always been interested in figuring out why humans behave the way that they do. But it really wasn't until about just 200 years ago that we actually created a field of study for it. And girls, psychology is a science. Oftentimes people in the social studies department laugh at me because I don't really have much to say in our department meetings. Technically, I'm the party planning committee of the social studies department. But really, girls, this class that you're in right now is a science. It's a science because we use experiments when looking at human behavior and animal behavior. So when we use an experiment, we're going back to fourth grade here, all psychologists, when they're looking at human behavior, will ask themselves a question, do a little background research on what they're looking at, construct a hypothesis or, a belief of what they believe will happen in their experiment, run the experiment, and then analyze their results. This is called the scientific method. So when we look at studies done on human behavior in here, please know that this is a science and psychologists are all following very laid out, detailed plans of how we look at that behavior. So from 200 years on, we're going to kind of look at psychology as the way it developed throughout history. So at the beginning of psychology, an actual field of study, we've put a name to it. Psychology and psychologists used what we called a view of structuralism to look at human behavior. Wilhelm Wundt, his name's Wundt, not Wundt, he's German. Wilhelm Wundt created the first psych lab ever where he was able to run experiments on human beings and observe their behavior in Germany about 200 years ago. And his way of learning about human behavior is called structuralism. He structured an environment to put people in, and then he just kind of watched what happened. So he put participants in controlled situations, and all he did, girls, was have them report their own thoughts and feelings about that situation. So if I put you in a dark room for 5 hours, how would you feel about that? That's structuralism. Really, girls, what it used was what we called introspection. So in your notes, underline, highlight, star introspection. It's your key term for structuralism. Using introspection, girls, is just asking somebody to look within themselves and have them examine how they feel. They're going to tell you about their thoughts, their emotions, their feelings, and that's how you conduct your research. Now, we know that this is not the only way we can look at why humans behave the way they do. It's way too subjective. So it wasn't until a few years later, when the field of psychology came to the United States, that a man by the name of William James added functionalism, or the functionalistic approach to psychology, to structuralism as well. So William James was a student of Wilhelm Wundt, and he actually created, girls, the first psych lab ever in the United States at Harvard University. But he also created the very first psychological class, or psychology class, at Harvard as well, and created the first textbook that went along with it. So James was a big follower of Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin is also a famous psychologist we're going to talk a lot about this semester. You've probably heard of Darwin before, his theory of evolution, survival of the fittest, all that good stuff. And James really believed, after reading the studies of Darwin, that you can't just ask people how they feel about certain situations. You're going to have to observe them as well and make your own decisions about certain things. So functionalism, girls, is really bringing in people's environment around them and watching how they adapt to it, or how they adjust. So I'm not only going to ask you how you felt after being put in a dark room for hours and hours, I'm going to watch how you behave as well. So functionalism, girls, really emphasized how behavior and mental processes enable human beings and animals, organisms, to adapt, survive, and flourish. So we've got structuralism now, and we've added functionalism to the mix. The last thing psychologists really have to pay attention to, girls, is something that we call the psychoanalytical approach to psychology. And this is Sigmund Freud. Not only do we have to ask people about how they feel about certain situations that they're currently in, and we have to pay attention to the environment around them or how they grew up, we also need to ask them about their past and look into their past and maybe their dreams and their drives, and how that has changed or shaped their personality and behaviors. So Sigmund Freud, girls, was really the first person to come up with this psychoanalytical approach to psychology as well. And he said, that's great. We'll use structuralism. We'll put people in a structured environment, ask them how they are. We'll also keep people in their natural environment and observe them in their natural environment. But also, we really need to get to the roots of why people behave the way they do and why they feel certain things that they feel. So Sigmund Freud was actually just like an internist, a house doctor back in Austria in the day. And what Freud noticed, so he was the type of doctor that you would call if you had a cold or the flu or chicken pox or broke your arm, whatever. He looked at everybody. He was a family doctor. But what he started to notice, girls, was that people were coming to him with really bad physical ailments and physical symptoms like stomach ulcers, insomnia, heart disease, high blood pressure, but he couldn't find anything physically wrong with them. And what Freud finally figured out, girls, was that these people had what we call somatic symptoms, or physical symptoms from an emotional ailment. And what we know today is that the number one killer of people throughout the world is stress. So what he did, girls, was he started to bring patients, put them on a couch, and start asking them about their feelings in their life. In order to treat their physical symptoms, he had to treat the stressors in their life. And this is what we call the psychoanalytical approach to psychology. So say, we have a student who has ADHD. We'll say he's a 10-year-old little boy and he's starting to see a therapist to maybe get diagnosed with ADHD. So as a good therapist, I'm going to use all three approaches to help my little patient. I'm going to see how he feels in certain situations, like being in school. What are his classes like? How does he feel about his friends around him? What causes him stress during the day? All that good stuff. I'm also, girls, going to ask his teachers, his parents, his caregivers, how they observe him behaving in his environment around him. And then also, I'm going to look into that child's past. Does he have a family history of ADHD, anxiety? What certain things in the past has brought him certain stress or anxiety that he feels like he might be out of control with? All that good stuff. As a good psychologist, we have to focus on the human being as a whole, not just certain aspects of behavior. So today, girls, we still use these three different approaches to psychology. We just call them something a little different. Today, we call them the multiple levels of analysis. And there are those three different approaches to looking at human behaviors or looking at patients. It's like looking through a microscopic lens. And you've got your patient down here, and you're looking at them through three different lenses to really treat them as a whole person. The first level, that's kind of like the structural level, is what we now call the biological level of analysis. As a good psychologist, if I have a patient that comes to my office and they have presented symptoms of depression for months on end and they can't get out of it, before I diagnose that patient with depression, I'm going to have to look at them in three different ways. I'm going to have them do a physical. I'm going to take a family history, look at their genetics. I'm going to look at their brain to make sure that's functioning correctly. I'm going to make sure that they don't have a chemical imbalance or a hormonal imbalance. Then I'm going to treat them from the cognitive level of analysis. I want to know how they think about themselves and how they think about people around them and the world around them. I want to know how they interpret certain things. Are they a optimist or a pessimist? I want to know how they perceive the world around them and how they remember certain things. And then also, girls, I really want to pay attention to the environment that they've grown up in and the society that they're living in now. If a child is being bullied, that for sure can lead to depression. I'm going to look at what their home life is like, their family life, what their situation is with friends and their boss and their coworkers, all that good stuff. So when we look at studies this semester in psychology, we are going to look at different cases from a biological perspective, a cognitive perspective, and a social perspective. So what I want you to do today, we've already done this, Careers in Psychology project. What I want you to do today is you are going to create a page from some of the psychologists that we've talked about in these notes and others that we're going to be talking about through the semester. And if you go find your rubric in your Unit 1 folder, it simply lays out exactly what I want you to turn in. And make sure that you turn that in on Schoology because I'm going to use your research when introducing these psychologists later on.